Hey, Nicole Norwood with you here again for some more tea time and talk about the industry. And today, since we are just past the 30th anniversary, which is mind-blowing to me, but the 30th anniversary of the launch of the WB television network, I thought we would talk about that for a little bit today. And why it was so important and the lessons we can take from what we did at the time. So I joined the WB network right after Buffy the Vampire Slayer had gotten on the air, and I started there as an assistant and first became an executive there, and I worked on some of their seminal shows, and it really was an amazing foundation as an executive, but also just an incredible time to be there to be part of shows that were such huge moments of the cultural zeitgeist at the time, and shows that I think I didn't even realize the impact that they would have on people many years later, long after they had originally aired. So we're going to start and talk about that and some of the lessons learned. So first, I think one interesting thing to note about the WB network is that it really found its early success finding people with really specific points of view, stories they wanted to tell, personalities, and being willing to take a shot, take a gamble, give people the opportunity to share their voice. So if you think about the really early days, it was the Jamie Foxx show, the Steve Harvey show, the Wayans brothers, all, first of all, incredibly funny and amazing talents in their own right, but all with a very specific point of view. And people who really understood their audience and what people were looking for, and they really filled a gap in the market. And obviously all of those people have gone on to even bigger and more illustrious careers, but they really were the foundation of that network in so many ways. Sort of the next wave of shows that came in were a lot of the teen shows. And these, I think, are particularly interesting in our current market, which is so focused on big IP, big names, often big budgets. And at the time, the WB certainly did not have big budgets. I remember driving up from my interview that first day, and it was not even on the main Warner Brothers lot. We were on the Warner Brothers Ranch, which is this adjacent lot that was completely dusty. We were in a series of double wide trailers, so you drive up feeling like, oh my God, someone could wheel us away at any time if they decided this network was a terrible experiment. It really was a very temporary feeling, and I definitely asked myself more than once, like, why did I take this job? Was this really a great move? Like, I don't know. But it was. And the people who worked there were phenomenal talents, both writers, executives, really amazing colleagues, and honestly, friends that, are still close 20, 25, 30 years later. So, sometimes you just gotta take the leap and go for it. But back to some of the teen shows that really built the network, and the voices of people who created those shows. So when we hear the names today, you think, oh yeah, of course, Joss Whedon, J.J. Abrams, Ryan Murphy, Amy Sherman Palladino, Jason Katims, Kevin Williamson, Greg Berlanti. These were all early creators of shows on the WB network. At the time, they were not the household names that they are now. They were people who were coming off smaller feature careers or just starting out in the television business. Maybe this was their first show that they'd ever run, certainly first show that most, if not all of them, had created. And they weren't big budgets. They didn't have huge stars. And it was really about the team taking a leap of faith and knowing that these writers had a real voice and something they really wanted to say, even if that at first blush feels like, oh, it's just another teen show. Well, none of those shows were. They were all more than meets the eye, which is, something I think is really important to think about when you're crafting a television show. Is in an ideal world, you want it to work on multiple levels. You want it to be fun and enjoyable and something people can just watch and put away. But it would be nice to also have something under the surface. So if someone's looking for something a little more, that's there for them as well. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a fantastic example of that. So, Buffy is not just a show about a girl fighting demons on a hellmouth. It's really an allegory for what it is to grow up, the challenges of adolescence, whether that's your first college roommate, your first love, conflict with your family, your friends. It really took the idea of fighting demons and made it so much richer and so much more. And it was a show that took risks, from a musical episode to a silent episode to really dramatic and emotional episodes to episodes that were a little more campy and fun. It really wasn't afraid to swing for the fences, and it didn't always work. Some episodes, maybe not as good, but you know what, when you're doing 22 episodes of television, you're going to have great ones, you're going to have not so great ones, then you're going to have the ones in the middle that are really enjoyable, but, maybe aren't at the top of the list. And that's okay. That's as it should be when you're creating television, right? So, and if your audience is connecting with your characters, they're going along for the ride. So Buffy is a great example of how to combine genre, both horror and teen romance, adolescence, with and imbue it with some deeper meaning. And then you have a show like Dawson's Creek, a show like Felicity, a show like The Gilmore Girls, and I think about those shows a lot these days, to be honest, because if I were to go into, I would say pretty much any buyer these days and pitch those shows, I would either get laughed out of the room or not make it into the room at all. And it's really unfortunate because I think people underestimate what those shows really were. And that is shows that really came from the heart of their creators, that really wanted to say something about connection, about love, about friendship, about humanity. And just because it was through a teen lens, that didn't make it any less significant. And I will say, like, one of the things that really blew me away is at one point I was working at Netflix on the international team and working on original shows for Italy. And I was talking to a couple of people there on our team. One who was our woman who was in charge of photography. She was in her 20s, born and raised in Italy. Our social media guy, also similarly in his 20s, Italian. And they had these vibrant memories of watching Dawson's Creek, of watching Buffy, and they loved those shows. They were really significant to them. Now, they were watching those shows long after they had aired in the US. And, a half a world away. And those shows still were resonant. And I think that is a real testimony to the talent of those writers, that they were writing about real human emotion and they were really focused on the connection they were creating, not only between their characters, but between the characters and their audience. And I think that's something that often gets really underestimated these days, is that audiences really want that. They don't just want things blowing up and, you know, crazy action or like endless sex scenes. Like they really are looking for human connection. And I think those shows really delivered that in spades. And to see them, be successful across time and culture, I think is a real testament um, to what those writers were able to do. Similarly, I think you look at a show like Gilmore Girls, which I think all the time, how would I pitch that show if I were going into a buyer these days? It's a show, it's about a mom and her daughter in a small town, and they have lots of quirky friends and coworkers, and they talk really fast. Everyone is just looking for the twists and the twists and the more and the more and the more and the more. And sometimes there doesn't need to be that. There just needs to be a really strong voice and a really strong relationship at the core of these series. And that's something that Gilmore Girls did. It's why people still tune in and start watching it today. And you don't, unfortunately, see a lot of shows like that anymore. So I think it's important to really think about those really essential elements when you're crafting a show or a movie. Like, what are those things that are really going to connect with the audience? And not only that, but what are those things that really emotionally connect with you as a writer that you can bring to the table? Because if you take away all the flash, all the, spectacle, the visual effects, you still should have a great story there at the center of it. And I think that's something that the WB network did really, really well. We'll be back next time with new stories.